Distinguished Chief Speaker of the Day, Reverend Dr. Thomas Padiyath, Professor P.J. Thomas, the head of the department, esteemed professors, scholars, and other attendees across the globe. A very pleasant evening, afternoon, and good morning to one and all. We commence on to the second day of our academic online course on Introduction to Philosophy and Theory. Yesterday we had an elevating and enlightening session by Professor R. Radhakrishnan from the University of California. I presume you benefited a lot from his profound thought and wisdom. I am here with the task to welcome you all to the second day of our online course. It gives me immense joy and privilege to introduce and welcome Dr. Thomas Padiyath, our esteemed speaker of the day. In today's lecture, he will give an overview of the classical Western philosophy, starting from the Greek world to its development in the medieval scholastic period. Dr. Padiyath serves as the manager of St. BERCHMANS College as well as our sister concern, Assumption College. Dr. Padiyath is an efficient administrator with a strong academic fervor. He obtained his master's and also PhD from Catholic University, Leuven, Belgium, in systematic philosophy. Dr. Padiyath also holds a master's degree in Christian studies from Madras University and a licentiate in theology from Leuven, Belgium. The topic of his doctoral dissertation is the metaphysics of becoming, on the relationship between creativity and God in Alfred Whitehead and Satchidananda, and the supermind in Aurobindo Ghosh. The academic reputation of Dr. Padiyath is in the area of process philosophy and its Indian counterpart in Aurobindo. An erudite scholar in process thought, a very flourishing area of philosophy, Dr. Padiyath is an expert figure of Whiteheadian philosophization. He was a leading academic figure in the Whitehead conferences in Austria and Bangalore. He was the resident faculty at Good Shepherd Major Seminary, Thalassery, and now a visiting professor of various acclaimed philosophical institutes in India. A very warm welcome to you, Reverend Dr. Thomas Padiyath. I also extend a warm welcome and appreciation to Professor P.J. Thomas, the head of English department, St. BERCHMANS College, who has taken great interest and effort towards the conduct of this online course. Cordial welcome, sir. Next, I would like to welcome Dr. Raju Sebastian and Dr. Robin E.J., the coordinators of this online course. Again, I would like to welcome all the scholars, professors, students, and other esteemed attendees across the globe. Wishing you all an enlightening session. Thank you. Now over to the speaker, Dr. Thomas Padiyath.
So thank you very much for the warm welcome and also for the introduction. Am I clear to you?
Yes, sir, you are.
Okay. So I am also grateful to the organizers, particularly to the Department of English, St. BERCHMANS College, Changanasheri, for organizing such a enlightening thing, introducing philosophy to the Department of Philosophy as well as to the students of philosophy and those who are interested in the study of philosophy. It is certainly, as many have recalled, it is a new venture from the Department of English. I am grateful and I appreciate the efforts of the particularly the efforts of the head of the department, Professor P.J. Thomas, and also the other, his colleagues, particularly Professor Raju Sebastian, and as already mentioned, Professor Robbins. And I am grateful to also to our principal, Professor Jacob Matthew, and vice principals and others. So as the welcome speaker introduced, today I will discuss classical philosophy, beginning with the Greek philosophy, moving towards medieval philosophy. Of course, we will very briefly discuss the transition from medieval to modern. I have prepared a few slides and I will share it with you. Okay. So I hope you can see the slides. So most of you are familiar with the word philosophy, but at the same time, though it is a very familiar term and terminology, but if we ask what is philosophy, we become perplexed, or many may not be able to answer what it is properly. So let us look at what is the etymological meaning of the word philosophy. It is a combination of two Greek words, philia plus sophia. Philia means love, a friend, and sophia, wisdom. So philosophy means then love of wisdom or a friend of wisdom, and a philosopher is a friend of wisdom. And it was Pythagoras who used the word philosopher to himself for the first time, philosophos, denoting a sage or wise man. And thus, we can say a philosopher in Indian classical terminology, darsanikan, is a lover of wisdom or a friend of wisdom. Because wisdom is not, as we are familiar with, wisdom is not simply intellectual knowledge. Wisdom is more than mere intellectual knowledge. Perhaps what we can say is, wisdom is a combination of rational, experiential, intuitive, and revelatory knowledge. So it is rich in content than mere intellectual or book wisdom or book learning. To put it simply, a philosopher and a philosophy explores the mystery of being, in one word, we can say. And philosophy, we are often heard that philosophy begins with wonder. It's actually Aristotle who well stated it. And here we have the citation from his own Metaphysics. Philosophy begins with wonder, and even now, it is wonder that causes the philosopher to philosophize. More than that, we can say that philosophy begins with the questioning. And to question, or the word question, is always two-dimensional. The question of why. First, it refers to the source, arche, and it refers to, secondly, it refers to the goal or end, so telos. So, the search of philosophy is both archaeological as well as teleological. So, the fundamental questions that concerned philosophy was the origin of everything, origin of realities, origin of the world. From another perspective, we can say philosophy is both rational, critical, and constructive search for truth. Of course, we have to note that philosophy is often understood as a study and search for truth. But today we are speaking of the post-truth era. These are some of the concerns we have to pay attention. And a philosopher sees what others do not see. He sees beyond what others see. And still, a philosopher, a genuine philosopher, realizes that there are different ways of seeing. Therefore, we can generally say that philosophers are open to persons, realities, and experiences. I will cite from the contemporary philosopher Alfred North Whitehead, British mathematician, scientist, and philosopher, who gives a very comprehensive view of what philosophy is. Philosophy is not a mere collection of noble sentiments. So that's why we said that it is rational. It is not simply emotional. A deluge of such sentiments does more harm than good. Philosophy is at once general and concrete, critical and appreciative of direct intuition. It is a survey of possibilities and their comparison with actualities. In philosophy, the fact, the theory, the alternatives, and the ideal are weighed together. It gives our insight and foresight and a sense of the worth of life. In short, that sense of importance which nerves all civilized effort. It is indeed a very comprehensive understanding of what philosophy is and what philosophy does, and what should be the concerns and priorities of philosophy also. The very primary understanding of what philosophy is a philosophy is a view of life. From the Western perspective, it is a Weltanschauung, from the German Weltanschauung. It is a vision of life or a view of life. But from the Indian perspective, the classical Sanskrit word used for philosophy is darshana. Darshana means a way of life. That, of course, it also means vision of life. But darshana means, or more appropriate word for Indian philosophy, maybe it is a way of life. Indian darshana versus, therefore we can say simply the Indian darshana versus Western Weltanschauung or vision of life. We will see the differences later on. East and West. From this vision of life and way of life, there can be the differences also from the understanding. Socrates said, knowledge is virtue. From the Indian perspective, to know is to be. Therefore, we can say philosophy is a mode of being rather than doing. A life of thought which creates my doing. In the life of a true philosopher, there is no difference between ideal and actual or the real. Whatever he thinks is whatever he is, and so there is no compartmentalization between his thought and action. That's why it is said for the Indian darshana or Indian philosophy, to know is to be. In other words, a life according to thought and a thought according to life. it is in that respect and from that understanding we can explore the meaning of what Socrates said, knowledge is virtue. So the true knowledge, ideal knowledge and genuine knowledge or the wisdom leads one to a virtuous life. We will take up that issue later on once again. And for the Indian, as I said already, Indian Darshana, to know is to be. And that's why both in the West as well as in the East, philosophers were considered to be great sages or mystics. And philosophers, in the words of Pythagoras, is a mystic as well. And from the Indian context, we can say great philosophers were known as acharyas. In other words, great mystics. Those who lived what they thought and what they taught, affirming that philosophy is a way of life again. So that is a very brief discussion of what philosophy is. And now we come to what are the basic categories of philosophical discourse. The three categories of any philosophical discourse is God, world, and human being. Or we can simply say human experience as well. But these categories, God, world, and human being, these are the fundamental categories of philosophical discourse, either in the East or in the West. But the question with regard to God, a philosopher certainly discusses God. It does not mean that he accepts God or he believes in God. But any philosopher simply cannot ignore the category God. Either he has to stand for or deny God. And thus we can say simply there are theists as well as atheists. Atheism is a clear negation or denial of God. But then the question of world, with regard to the origin of the world, with regard to the, certainly, of course, the telos also, the purpose, then human being, then philosophy. If the fundamental categories of thought are God, world, and human being, and human experience, then certainly we can say philosophy is, in one sense, a hermeneutics. Philosophy is hermeneutics. I mean, I don't here mean that philosophy or hermeneutics as a new trend of Western philosophy. Of course, we will, the coming days, we will also discuss on hermeneutics. We will have a lecture on hermeneutics. But I don't mean here philosophy, the trend hermeneutics, but I do say that philosophy is hermeneutics. Philosophy is interpretation of God, world, and human being and human experience. Therefore, we can simply say that there are different philosophies according to these different interpretations. So, we have Western philosophy as well as Indian philosophy. Now we do speak of African philosophy and so on. That is a very broadest division of philosophy itself, the Western and Eastern. The way the Westerners look at God, world, and human being is different from the Eastern perspective. So we have, as I already said, we have different philosophies. From another perspective, what is philosophy? Philosophy is an attempt to understand what is reality. Or from the Indian perspective, we can simply say what is really real. The Paramarthika Sattva in Indian understanding or Shankara's understanding. To this question, what is the fundamental substratum? What is the ultimate source? Greek philosophers came up with the different answers. And for the beginners of philosophy, I would say, the Western philosophy has its matrix or its origin in Greek world. So, we refer to the Greek philosophers. So, to the fundamental question, what is reality? Greek philosophers came up with the different questions. And what are they? Matter, this fundamental substratum. Is it material or spiritual? So Thales came up, maybe the first philosopher. Water is the source. Anaximander, air is the substratum, the fundamental source. Heraclitus, fire. Democritus, atoms. So even now we have to wonder at his own discoveries. Democritus said already at that time, in the 4th century maybe, BC, he said that atoms are the substratum of the universe. A modern finding from the science, or the discipline of science, we say that atoms. But Democritus at that time was able to say that atomic entities are the basic substratum of the universe. Then came up Pythagoras, with the understanding numbers. Everything could be reduced to numbers. So, for the first Greek philosophers, they understood and they answered the fundamental questions in terms of cosmic realities. So we can say a kind of cosmocentrism in the Greek world, the first philosophers, pre-Socratic thinkers, the cosmocentric answers. And when we come to this Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle, we will see there is a shift from, or the first movement in the philosophical discourse. As I said earlier, the first philosophers tried to answer the fundamental questions in terms of cosmic realities or the physical realities pertaining to this world. But later on, Anaximander rejected the cosmocentric solutions and put forward an acosmic principle, acosmic, not cosmic, or a source, which he called apeiron, the unbounded, infinite. For Anaximander, apeiron can be understood in differently. Primordial, what is immobile, not generated, immutable. So for him, the ultimate source is, the foundation is, ultimate substratum is no more anything pertaining to this world, or what is subject to our sense experience, but something beyond, which he named apeiron. So there we have the first shift from the physical to the metaphysical, we can say. But it is a beginning only, starting from the physical to the metaphysical. But when we come to Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle, it becomes more clear and so. So the onset of Athenian metaphysics. So it is certainly a development from Anaximander's understanding of the world or the fundamental substratum. Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle. Movement from eudaimonia, happiness, to arete, virtue. That, of course, that we will see later. Socrates, he was basically an ethicist, a moral philosopher. Know thyself, very popular, world famous dictum from Socrates. The unexamined life is not worth living, knowledge is virtue, and so on. But one of the radical claims of Socrates is that all men are moral beings. He has to pay for these claims because at that time it was believed that only the elite group, only the intellectual people are able to have moral are able to make moral decisions. But Socrates said, all men are rational beings, therefore all men are moral beings. And many could not digest this, and therefore he had to pay for that. And that story is familiar to everybody. Then coming as a student of Socrates, Plato comes up. The Platonic dualism. For Plato, he fundamentally stood for the metaphysical world. For him, the primary world, or the real world, is the ideal world, the transcendental world. Affirmation of spirit. It is everything. And the physical world is mere shadow or image of the ideal world. Then movement from, but Plato certainly understood the transcendental being or the transcendental reality, which is the source of everything, as the good and good alone. There is no evil. According to Plato, there is no evil in this ultimate source or the ultimate being, that we will take up later in our discussion with regard to philosophy and religion and so on. Then coming Aristotle as a student of Plato, in many ways they agreed. But Aristotle established his own originality in the history of philosophy with his own theories of hylomorphism, that reality is a composite of matter and form, and with his philosophy of self-realization, nature and purpose. Any entity has a nature in view of the purpose to be achieved in its life, and that is the philosophy of self-realization, and equally applicable in the case of human being. So human beings are rational animals, social beings or social animals. Moreover, he stated man or human being is a political animal, political being. So we don't go to the details of these, to a certain extent, fathers of philosophy, Western philosophy, but we just mention the major thinkers and the gradual shift. Not just for that sake, I refer to them. The shift and progression, Plato and Aristotle. Matter to spirit, or cosmic to metaphysical. And that is what we said as from the Greek philosophers, from the early Greek philosophers, pre-Socratic thinkers to Socrates, Plato and Aristotle, the movement, the shift and progression. The primary type of being is obviously the what, or the whatness, the substance of the thing, Aristotle, in that way. So in Plato and Aristotle, we see two different thought patterns. In other words, Plato advocated a clear idealism. Everything comes from the transcendental, from the metaphysical, from the ideal to the real. Whereas for Aristotle, we have to start from the real, but gradually moving upward to the metaphysical. But both of them agreed with regard to the metaphysical. Metaphysics and the metaphysical is a must for them. In other words, their basic difference was in the methodology, deduction versus induction. While Plato started from the universal to the particular, started from the universal, then coming down to the particular. Aristotle started from the particular and then ascended to the universal or the metaphysical. With regard to Aristotle, we had to say Aristotelian cosmology. Aristotle is certainly a great figure in the history of philosophy. So I wrote about many things. cosmology, metaphysics, politics, ethics, everything, no, was a subject or subjected to his own philosophical discourse. Aristotle in cosmology demanded or necessitated a metaphysics. So though that's why I said that is only the difference between the methodology between Plato and Aristotle. For both of them, the primary, the fundamental is the transcendental. But for Aristotle, we have to start from the physical and transcending to the metaphysical. Aristotelian cosmology demanded or necessitated a metaphysics. It demands some explanation. I don't know whether the time, but still, the basic cosmological understanding of Aristotle is that in nature, what we see is the basic phenomena or phenomenon is movement, dynamism, and so on. And from the basic theory in physics, every effect has a cause. So starting, he was a physician also. So starting from this principle, he had to speak with regard to a metaphysical principle. Who is what is behind this movement and that movement? But we cannot go on asking such a question. So he has to finally postulate a transcendent being, which he named unmoved mover. Unmoved mover. But and that's why I said here, Aristotelian cosmology necessitated a metaphysics. So in order to substantiate his own cosmological principles, cosmological theories, he had to speak of a metaphysical principle, which he named unmoved mover. But we have to be very clear that in Aristotle, this metaphysical principle was only a philosophical principle. But later, philosophers maybe personalized this unmoved mover. Some said that it is God, for some said it is an absolute, and so on. But that is another discussion. But still, what we have to remember is that from Aristotle, the establishment of metaphysics we have, or a clear affirming of metaphysical reality. And Aristotle has a book on metaphysics. That is what we say as metaphysics, ta metaphysica. Metaphysics literally means what comes after the physical. So it has got another implication, but I don't go to that. But still, Aristotelian metaphysics is certainly a starting point for further philosophical discourse also in later centuries. And today or nowadays, we speak of a movement from metaphysics to metaxology and so on, but that is a contemporary discussion, a dialogue of the between and so on. Some of the Irish thinkers speak of that. But medieval. So from the classical Greek philosophy, we move to medieval period. Usually it is said that from the 4th century, 5th century to 13th century, the medieval period is generally concerned or generally understood as this time span. If the Greek world was cosmocentric, medieval philosophical world is theocentric. There we have, I just say the basic features of medieval thinking and the basic historical moments, etc. Combination of faith and reason, religion and philosophy, or religion and philosophy, emergence of Islamic philosophy, that is a particular point that we have to note from the 7th century, scholasticism, where we have a combination of faith and reason, Neoplatonism, for example, those who advocated the Platonic understanding, in contrast to the Aristotelian, Neo-Aristotelians. So for example, Neoplatonists, Plotinus and Augustine, and Aristotelians, Thomas Aquinas, the great Aristotelian, and the debate between the Franciscans, those who followed basically Platonic philosophy, from a Christian context, and also the Dominicans, the debate between the Franciscans and Dominicans, and so on. These are the basic, some of the points that we have to remember with regard to medieval philosophy. Basically, the scholastic method, namely combination of faith and reason, or religion and philosophy. That is what we see. A combination. That is what we see in the early Greek philosophy also. The Greek philosophers were more sympathetic, more accommodative with regard to the religious sensitivity. But later, when we come to modern philosophy, we see a separation or a compartmentalization. But that will refer later. Then we have two philosophers of transition. I just for your understanding's sake, I say that the trajectory or the historical development. Namely, the philosophers of transition, two English philosophers, namely John Duns Scotus and William of Ockham. Both are British. One is from Scotland, that is all. But they're the United Kingdom. So the question of the universal and the particular was, so for some of them, there is no universal as such. Universal is only nominal, and that is the idea behind nominalism. For them, only there are only particulars. So Occam's razor and so on, that law of parsimony, unnecessary multiplication of reality or concepts should be avoided. That is the Occam razor's basic idea. So this we have to keep in mind, namely the philosophers of transition, namely Occam and Scotus. There, actually one point that we have to keep in mind is that in medieval philosophy, there can be a kind of domination. I don't know whether that is the appropriate word, but still a kind of domination of the religion can be seen. Because whenever there was a debate between or a controversy between, often the authorities or the world, or maybe I can say that also the Christian world sided with the point of faith and religion. But gradually we see that shift, and that's what I say as philosophers of transition. Then we see gradually the emergence of reason as primordial. That is how. So if we can keep in mind this chronological division of philosophy and its thrust, ancient philosophy, cosmocentric, medieval philosophy, theocentric, God-centered, and modern philosophy, anthropocentric, or the subject, the thinking subject, and contemporary, of course, as a reference only, contemporary philosophy, we see that the linguistic, analytic, and positivistic turn. And from our basic theme, philosophy and theory, this linguistic philosophy, analytic philosophy, etc., are more important. But I speak from a classical, my topic is classical philosophy, so I just refer to that. But philosophy used to ask limited questions. And some of the fundamental questions of philosophy are, one is one and many. The question of one and many. It is equally applicable to Western philosophy and Eastern philosophy or Indian philosophy from our point of view. A challenging question, as I said, for the West as well as East. So one and many, one or many, whether the reality is one or reality is many, or this is the core of the question. What is ultimate substratum? We said that, okay, the pre-Socratic thinkers said that something physical, but whether it is one or a monistic, a clear monism or pluralism, one or many. From the Western world, we have the two candidates, those who advocated that the reality is one, the Parmenides and Plotinus. Whereas from the Western world, we have Leucippus and Democritus advocating pluralism. As we have already seen, Democritus was the advocate of atomism in philosophy. In other words, being is versus both being and non-being. In other words, pluralism. And this is Western understanding. From the Eastern perspective, and in the Eastern world, we have the same question. For example, Shankaracharya said, reality is one, Advaita. Later on, Madhvacharya came and said, no, how can I make a difference? How can I say that myself and the table are one and same? So we cannot simply reduce reality to Advaita or a single reality. So reality is certainly dual or dualism advocated by Madhvacharya. Later on, Ramanuja came up with a solution for the problem of one and many, which was a perennial question, or which is still, we can simply say, for the sake of argument. Ramanuja, the solution of Ramanuja was, okay, reality, reality is one and many at the same time. How can it be? He said that, okay, there are different plurality, or there are different many realities, but the many depend on the one. So his philosophy is known as Vishishta Advaita, or the qualified monism. Shankara's Advaita monism, Madhvacharya's Dvaita dualism, Ramanuja's Vishishta Advaita qualified monism, meaning the many depending on the one. So ultimately, there is reality is one, but the same reality manifests itself as many. So that is basic Indian understanding also. And what was the solution of Aristotle for this one and many problem in the Western world? And it is his own theory of act and potency is Aristotelian solution to the question of one and many. The reality is one when it is in the act, being. But every being has the possibility or the potentiality of becoming. And that is why his own, the theory of act and potency is the solution to the question of one and many in the Western world. And later, the contemporary Indian understanding that reality is the combination of three categories, namely Sat, Chit, Ananda, and Satchidanandam. So from the Indian perspective, we say that Satchidanandam Brahman. So the absolute is a combination of Sat, Chit, Ananda, namely pure existence, pure consciousness, and pure bliss, Ananda. Okay, that is. So this question of one and many was a major question both in the East as well as in the West. So many. So as I said earlier, spirit alone. Some claimed that spirit alone. For example, we have Indian advocate Shankaracharya, and some said that matter alone. Even we have a counterpart here also, namely we say that Indian system of Charvaka advocated materialism, pure materialism, in as a counterpart to Western materialism. Matter and spirit. So for some, both matter and spirit, Upanishad, that is, it demands much explanation. So, but still we can certain ideas from Indian philosophy. Matter is also Brahman. So when we say that reality is one, so how can we account for this matter and Brahman reality? Or as Madhvacharya asked, how can I say that myself, the self and the table or the material object are one and same? And there Upanishad, the solution is that matter is also Brahman. So, but that cannot be easily, or it is not easily understandable. But there we have to have a the evolutionary understanding of the reality from an Indian perspective, which is in the contemporary world, which is advocated by Arvind Ghosh, and his philosophy is known as integral Advaita. And in this slide, we have that movement. According to Aurobindo, the condition of possibility for the reality in the world is descent of Brahman to the material reality. That is the starting point is absolute, supermind, mind, life, matter. So in order to understand the evolutionary statement that matter is also Brahman, we have to understand this evolutionary development. The involution in Arvindonian term, it is the involution of the spirit or the absolute that is the condition of possibility for the ascent of human being or ascent of these physical realities. That is starting from matter, life, mind, supermind, absolute, and so on. But this is very clearly applicable in the case of human being. From another perspective, the question of one and many can be explained in terms of being and becoming. In the Western world, we have Parmenides standing for being and Heraclitus standing for becoming. And from the Eastern perspective, we have Advaita, namely Shankara, standing for being alone, and later on the philosophers, later Vedantic thinkers, for example, the contemporary thinker, namely Arvind Ghosh, standing for becoming. And as I earlier said, Aristotle's idempotency, the solution to the problem of one and many. So then, the question of human being coming up. Aristotle said that any reality is a combination of or a composite of matter and form. When we apply that to human being, that understanding, human being is a composite of body and soul. And thus, then we can say, as we already recalled in Aristotle's philosophy, a human being is a rational being, social being, moral being, spiritual being, etc. In this sense, authentic understanding of human being leads to the authentic life. Then, as Socrates said, the true knowledge with regard to human being himself or herself, it leads to an authentic life. So that is the movement from knowledge to virtue. Knowledge is virtue for Socrates. So how knowledge becomes virtue? Normally, naturally, the genuine knowledge, ideal understanding of human being, for example, as a rational being, social being, moral being, and spiritual being, leads someone to a virtuous life. That is the authentic understanding leads to authentic life. So that is also from a different perspective, movement from eudaimonia to virtue, or knowledge to virtue. Then, as we see, there is the third development in the history of philosophy. We enter the world of modernity. But we have seen that the philosophers of transition as the William of Ockham and Duns Scotus. Modernity, entry into modernity with René Descartes, the French philosopher, mathematician, and scientist, father of modern philosophy. He started from his own doubt and the questioning the skeptics, but that demands explanation, but if I have time, I will explain later. For Descartes, criterion of truth is clear and distinct idea. There, as we have already said, modern philosophy is subject-centered, the thinking subject. The classical claim of Descartes, cogito ergo sum, I think therefore I am. So I am a thinking being. I am a rational being. It is in contrast to the skeptics. He asserted or affirmed that nobody can deny, there is no question of doubting about my own existence. I do exist as a thinking being. So nobody can deny that. So it was Augustine who defended or who challenged skepticism in the medieval classical world, and it is in modernity. It was René Descartes who challenged skepticism, and he asserted with his own cogito ergo sum that nobody can deny my existence as a thinking being. So in modernity, the thrust on thinking, subject, and reason. So reason become primary. In the medieval world, God was or theocentrism. In modern period, anthropocentrism or the subject or the rational being becomes primary. Then the impact of this primordiality of reason we see in the modern period, modernity and transcendence. What we see, the laws of transcendence, or from a Platonic Aristotelian Thomism, we see the transcendental reality was the primordial reality. But as we come to modernity, there is a relegation of the transcendental to the empirical. That is the laws of transcendence, what I mean by laws of transcendence. The emergence of immanent transcendence. For example, reason is enthroned, and the transcendental beings is dethroned in modernity and in the contemporary. And there we have to particularly remember enlightenment, and there we have the famous claim of Kant. What is enlightenment? It is nothing but human beings released from his or her self-injured tutelage. In other words, one has to apply one's reason, assert one's rationality, and go wherever the reason leads you. That is the point. Another major question of philosophy, or another major theme that we see in philosophical discourse, is the relation between philosophy and religion. A very, very general point what we can make is both science and philosophy had a common matrix in the very beginning, namely religion. But as we move forward, we see that combination and collaboration of philosophy and religion, medieval period, and even now we can simply say that there is collaboration of philosophy and religion. But at the same time, there is a very clear view of separating philosophy and religion. Or some say that philosophy has its own world, religion has its own world. And we have to respect each other and so on. But some people, for some at least, there is no question of dialoguing with religion. Philosophy has its own role, and it is totally different from religion and so on. Anyway, we cannot simply deny the classical understanding or the classical point, namely science and philosophy had a common matrix, namely religion. And today, elements of philosophy, science, and religion mingle in a rich and hearty brew. That is a citation from Anthony Kenny. But it points to the classical understanding of where we have this a more sympathetic and accommodative understanding of these three concepts or three realities, namely philosophy, religion, science, and so on. Then, if I can refer to the contemporary period, moving from modern period to the contemporary, or as we nowadays said, postmodern period, we have the emergence of logical positivism or linguistic philosophy, analytic philosophy, etc. Where we have in the linguistic philosophy, where we cannot, but we have to remember Wittgenstein and his own two contributions, a Tractatus Logica Philosophicus and the Philosophical Investigations. And whereas positivism, in positivism, what we see is a clear application of scientific method to philosophy, which cannot be accepted generally what I say is simply philosophy and science has two clear different methods. So we cannot simply adapt and apply the method of science to philosophy. When we apply an empirical method to something metaphysical, certainly it becomes meaningless. And that is the claim of the positivists today. But that we cannot simply accept that. And to a certain extent, even Wittgenstein, people say the early Wittgenstein was for that. But the second Wittgenstein, or in his own second book, Philosophical Investigation, he changed his own viewpoint. And that's why we have, today we speak of the second Wittgenstein, where we have this understanding where we have to move together, namely philosophy and religion, for a clear understanding. And I just point to one of the claims of Wittgenstein here. We also, I just refer only, it is not my topic as such, but still, philosophy is not a theory. When we speak of philosophy and theory, of course, from the contemporary discussion, we can say philosophy and theory and so on, but still, Wittgenstein himself stated clearly that philosophy is not a theory or a doctrine, but rather an activity. It is an activity of clarification of thoughts and more so of critique of language and so. Okay. But just conclude with the contemporary movement that a revival of what we have already seen in Heraclitus, that being is becoming dynamic. The very essence of real actuality is process, not something static, and so on. That is with regard to process philosophy, the two fundamental aspects of pure existence and the world existence, a fact of being as well as becoming. Then I will conclude with this. We have to a certain extent, we have moved away from the very scope of philosophy. When I speak from the point of view of classical philosophy, the contemporary philosophical discourse has limited or reduced the scope of philosophy to either to linguistic analysis or to from the Russell's point of view, analytic, from the point of positivism to the scientific. So there is a reduction of the scope of philosophy. So therefore, I will quote Whitehead himself to conclude that we have to rediscover the scope of philosophy. Namely, you cannot shelter theology from science or science from theology, nor you can shelter either of them from metaphysics or metaphysics from either of them. There is no shortcut to truth. So we have to have an integral view, a holistic view, because I cannot simply reduce my own experiences to rational experiences alone. I have something which goes beyond my own rational experiences, rational understanding. I will call this, I will recall the famous citation of Blaise Pascal of the 17th century, the French mathematician and philosopher. The heart has its own reasons, which the reason does not know. So what I mean is, one cannot simply reduce reality to rational alone or reality to spiritual alone. We have to have a very holistic, integral view of reality. And that's what I, from the very beginning said. A philosopher is basically open towards persons, realities, experiences, etc. We cannot simply take a univocal approach, a one-way approach, as Sankara said, the Advaita, or the reality is one alone and so on. A univocal approach is not the feasible one, but accommodating both our experiences, our rational experiences, our spiritual experiences, our moral experiences, our even emotional experiences. Then only we will be able to account for the reality as such. So thank you very much. Thank you for listening and attending. Once again, I pay my gratitude and appreciation to the organizers. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Father. It's now time to move on to the question and answer section. So me and Irene will be simultaneously reading the questions which have been posted in the Zoom platform.
Father, the first question is from Ram Kumar S. Can you please suggest some books to understand philosophy?
Of course. There is if you are interested very much to study in detail, there is a 11 volume history of philosophy by Frederick Copleston. And the last volume is this one, A History of Philosophy, Logical Positivism and Existentialism. This is the 11th volume. So there is 10 other volumes. So 11 volume history of philosophy. That is, of course, a very big, very Herculean task. But here is another one: is Introducing Philosophy by Robert C. Solomon. And there is also a single volume history of philosophy by Bertrand Russell. And in India, we have another single volume history of philosophy by Frank Tilly. These are some of the introductory books. There is also the Will Durant's idea of philosophy or something like that. Will Durant's. But the other things I said is okay. Then there is also another book by Dario Composta. He has written with regard to classical philosophy, medieval philosophy, modern philosophy, and so on. And still I have another volume, if you are interested still, where we have the classics of philosophy. Some of the core ideas or the text himself is taken from even from Greek philosophy and so on. Author is Louis P. Poiman. Okay, I hope it is sufficient.
Thank you, Father. Our next question is from Swasti Basai. How can we apply philosophy in literature?
Philosophy in literature. Of course, today, even the faculty of or the students of literature will certainly understand that today many of the philosophical concepts are applied in literature. And today, particularly this contemporary trends in Western philosophy, for example, the structuralism, linguistic philosophy, these are certainly very much applied in literature. And precisely this what I said is the structuralism, the structure of everything. Structure is everything, and even the that is there. We can see there is also a movement from linguistic philosophy to structuralism and so on, because people say that the linguists say that everything is language, everything is communication. The problem of philosophy is the problem of communication. So we have to pay attention to language, and that is certainly applied in literature and this structuralism also. And then coming to hermeneutics, one of the latest trends in Western philosophy is hermeneutics. Derrida, even Heidegger, then Paul Ricoeur. These figures are in the hermeneutic, advocates of hermeneutics. So today, we cannot certainly say that there are classical thinkers, I mean, from the classical point of view, systematic thinkers. But many philosophers are coming from the literary field. Even the French philosopher Sartre, he was a playwright. He was certainly came from the world of literature. Then the nihilistic thinker Albert Camus. He has got many novels, and he communicated his own basic philosophy through novels and other writings and so on. Philosophy has relevance in literature, and today philosophy is very much applied in literature also. And that's why this Department of Philosophy, Department of English only conducted this course. They see that the relevance of philosophy in literature. So that's what I can simply say. I am happy about that.
Thank you, Father. The next question is from Sharik Khan. Is there a distinctive school of Indian Islamic philosophy?
Distinct school of Indian Islamic philosophy, but we cannot. I may not be able to answer that question. But I don't see a very clear philosophical position with regard to the division in India, or the division Islamic denominations. I don't see a very clear philosophical position as the reason for the denominational division, but I can refer certainly to some of the medieval Islamic thinkers, namely Averroes, Avicenna, Al-Kindi, etc. These are some of the medieval thinkers from the medieval period only.
Thank you, Father.
Yeah.
Our next question is from Shraddha Singh. What is the difference between being and becoming? Do they correspond to the absolute?
Okay, that is a very interesting question where I can maybe contribute a bit. The question of being and becoming is certainly a classical question. As we have already referred, it is already from the very beginning of Greek philosophy we see this question. And I can say even the question of one and many can be read in terms of this being and becoming. Because the question of being and the question of one go in the same level. I mean, but whereas the question of many and becoming are also go in par. When we apply this, the question of being and becoming to the Indian context, from the very beginning, for the Indian thinkers, when we follow or when we subscribe the idea of Shankaracharya, reality is one and the world is simply the manifestation of the Brahman or the absolute, or from the Arvindonian point of view, the Satchidananda. And as I said earlier, in order to understand that, how it is possible, we have to have a evolutionary understanding, from absolute to supermind to mind to life, matter. Then the ascent from matter, life, mind, supermind, absolute. This is from the Indian perspective. Whereas from the Western perspective, we have this contemporary trend in Western philosophy, namely process philosophy. The chief advocate of process philosophy is a British mathematician, Alfred North Whitehead. For him, the primary is not being, but rather becoming. The reality is becoming. The reality is constituted of becoming. Because to explain that with an example, this lecture itself is a combination of many incidents that my preparation, my past reading, the technological preparations, etc., is meant for this particular act, or when we say in philosophical terminology, this lecture, if we consider as a being, it was every other endeavors, every other incidents or the events was in view of this single event, namely this lecturing. So according to him, everything in nature takes place. Everything in nature, there is a process. There is a process, and that process continues in nature. For example, a tree. A tree produces fruit, but naturally it will have its own end, or its own decaying in nature itself. But that decaying gives birth for the further life or the future life. So this movement, this process continues in the world. So everything is becoming for him. But it is not a continuous process. It is not there is no continuous process as some of the Buddhist claim, or even in the Western philosophy, the eternal recurrence of Nietzsche, as Nietzsche claimed. It is not a continuous becoming, but there is the becoming is in view of being, but that being again constitute the next generation of being. So there is a being which culminates, or which realizes its own being, then contributes further to the next generation of being, and so on. For example, my professors contributed for my my becoming, and as I maybe if I can consider myself as a teacher, and now I contribute further to the next generation. So this process continues in the world, and this is applicable in the case of every reality, the phenomenal reality, as well as the transcendent reality, according to Alfred North Whitehead. So he says that from the medieval philosophy, we have God understood as the unmoved mover. But from a Whiteheadian point of view, there is also movement in God. So he will identify two natures in God: the primordial nature of God and the consequent nature of God. The primordial nature of God corresponds to the classical understanding of God, namely the unmoved mover, or the immutable being, eternal being. But the consequent nature of God corresponds to, or the consequent nature is God's dialogue with the world, or interaction with the world. Whatever takes place in the world also affects God. For example, if I can say something from the religious point of view, God is not someone who stands or who sits above after creating the world without any concern for this world, but he is actually actively involved in the world. That's why we said that from a religious point of view, I speak, the prayer is heard by God. So God is moved by the prayers of the faithful. From the religious point of view, I speak. But the point is, God is not someone, or someone, as Aristotle said, God is not an unmoved mover. But from a Whiteheadian point of view, God is a moved mover. So God is moved by whatever takes place in this world. So that is a question, or that is an answer to the question of evil also, but that is another word, so I don't enter into that. So to conclude in one word, this being and becoming is applicable to the physical realities as well as to the metaphysical, namely from a Whiteheadian point of view to the metaphysical reality also. That's it.
Thank you, Father. The next question is from Aditi. In Chandogya Upanishad, there is a famous phrase, Tattvam Asi, which means one's inner self is identical with the ultimate.
Yeah.
If
That is certainly. Sorry.
Brahman is the ultimate, how do you relate reality vis-a-vis Brahman as presented by the Greek philosophers?
Okay. The first part of the question concerned Indian understanding. Indian understanding, that is Upanishadic, that is certainly as said, it is from the Chandogya Upanishad, where the Guru teaches the disciple. Upanishad literally means sitting nearby, sitting side by side, and at the feet of the Guru. So So he teaches Chandogya, the candidate's name is there, but I just forgot. Anyway, gradually, one cannot simply teach the ultimate truth. Okay, I cannot begin, I cannot speak like that. But anyway, there should be a gradual development. So, for example, Uddhalaga, yeah, the Upanishad, the Guru invites Uddhalagan, that is, I think, the name of the candidate there. And so the student, so he speaks of the phenomenal realities, phenomenal, what is in the world, what is in nature. So from there, he gradually takes the candidates to a transcendental reality, namely the absolute, from the Indian perspective, the Brahman. So then he says that one of the teachings of the Upanishad is that everything is Brahman. Everything is Brahman. So, and that is why sometimes Indian philosophy is accused of polytheism as well as pantheism. But that is another question. But still, coming back to why do the Upanishadic Guru tell that Tattvamasi, that thou art? This ultimate reality and you are not different. But of course, everybody knows that there is no complete identification between I and thou there. But certainly, as this world of realities and as human beings, we are part of God and we have our source in God, we have originated from God, etc. From the Indian perspective, whatever is in the phenomenal world is nothing but the manifestation of Brahman or the Absolute. So the point of the Guru is that myself or yourself or the candidate and the Absolute are not totally different. In other words, that thou art. And at a different stage, the candidate or the student is able to understand the Upanishadic dictum, namely, Aham Brahmasmi, I am Brahman. From that, from the level of that dialogical level, the candidate is elevated to is still a higher level, namely that he identifies himself with the Brahman. He is able to identify himself with Brahman. Of course, as I said, there is no complete identification, but there I am also from Brahman. I am also, from a religious point of view, I am also a created by God. Creation in the Hindu understanding and other religious understanding, there are differences, but still we can, for our understanding sake, I can say that the candidate or the student has to understand that I am part of Brahman. My source is Brahman. I have come out of Brahman and so on. So that the first one, that thou art, Tattvamasi, and Aham Brahmasi, Aham Brahmasmi, I am Brahman. So there is a gradual development in the understanding. There should be, as I earlier said, no, when we say that matter is also Brahman, it is not an easy thing to understand. But when we understand it in a evolutionary manner, it is easy. Okay, there is a different grades in the reality and so on. So, what was the second aspect of that question? How can we relate it with the Western understanding? Okay, so even that is very clear in Western philosophy. For example, Plotinus. I said the Neoplatonist Plotinus. Plotinus said that the nous is the original, the ideal, the source, and we partake, and we have our existence in the nous and so on. And later the Aristotelian, the greatest of the Aristotelians in the medieval period is Thomas Aquinas. Thomas Aquinas will put it as the participatory understanding of creature and the creator. The creatures participate in the existence of the creator. So my being is something that I have received, and that's the point, either from the Western point of view or from the Eastern point of view. So this has to be understood gradually. We may not be able to understand that if Tattvamasi, the statement Tattvamasi or Aham Brahmasmi easily, unless and until we have this a gradual development in the understanding of the creature and the creator and so on. From the Indian perspective, Brahman or Satchidananda and any human being or human existence in a reality. And that's why now the Upanishadic statement, namely, matter is also Brahman. From another perspective, the Upanishad will say that all is Brahman, everything is Brahman, and so on. So this understanding is we see both in the West as well as in the East.
Thank you, Father. Our next question is from Reema Neelamegam. Is existentialism close to philosophy? How does both differ? Do we have a philosophical interpretation of a postmodern text?
Philosophical interpretation of postmodern existentialism or what? Okay.
So you want me to repeat the question?
Yeah, please.
Is existentialism close to philosophy? How does both differ? Do we have a philosophical interpretation of a postmodern text?
Okay. Actually, existentialism and philosophy are not two things. Actually, existentialism is a trend in philosophy, particularly developed in the Western world. And father of existentialism is Søren Kierkegaard, a Danish thinker. What is the difference then? What is the difference from classical philosophy and this existentialism? Classical philosophy focused on essence. For example, we may say that what is the really real or what is the core of any reality from a philosophical point of view, or if I can take a philosophical concept, we may say that the really real core of any reality is substance. So the classical philosophy, at least from the time of Aristotle, it is a substance-centered philosophy. Substance are equally applicable to essence also. Essence or substance. So that was the core of any reality. Essence, that which makes a thing what it is substance. Or what makes a thing different from another thing is its essence. So the classical philosophy was substance-centered or essence-centered. And now coming to existentialism. Existentialists claimed that, okay, how can I say that my essence is the primordial? Essence is primordial, but how can I say that for them, existence is primordial? How can I make the difference? For they say that each moment of my existence constitute my essence. In other words, there is a development. As I develop in my physical existence, my essence also develop, or I form my essence in being. Whereas according to the classical thinkers or classical philosophy, I am given an essence already as a rational being. So Aristotle said human beings are rational beings. So what is the essence of human being? Rationality. And what are the other basic natures of human being? He is a social being. He is a moral being. So he is a political being, etc. These constitute my essence. Whereas for the For the existentialist, my existence constitutes my essence. So what is primordial is not the essence, rather existence. That's the basic difference between the classical philosophy and existentialism. And to repeat, the difference between, there is no difference between philosophy and existentialism. But what is existentialism? Existentialism is a trend in modern philosophy. Begin with or we consider Danish thinker Søren Kierkegaard as the father of existentialism. And this we refer to Jean-Paul Sartre, French philosopher. He is an existentialist thinker. Or Martin Buber from German is an existentialist thinker. Karl Jaspers, an existentialist thinker. These are some of them. Okay. So there, we have to understand that conceptual clarity should be there. Philosophy, and we cannot simply compare philosophy and existentialism, because existentialism is only a trend in Western philosophy, a new school of thought, a new branch of philosophy, and so on. That is all. Okay.
So there's one question from Nidhi John. Respected Father, why is the teaching of philosophy considered essential in the seminary formation of a Catholic priest? In your opinion, does philosophy enrich spirituality or does it hamper spirituality?
Certainly. What does philosophy do? As I said earlier, philosophy asks basic questions. Two basic, the question of why is a two-dimensional set. The question, it refers to the source, arche, as well as the question of why has a dimension to the goal, the purpose, the end, etc. So philosophy gives conceptual clarity from the, so I think the question or the question has come from somebody who has some background of this seminary formation and so on, or priestly formation and so on. So the theology is the science of God. Theology is an interpretation of God, etc. We can say very generally. But why do we study, or what is the necessity of studying philosophy? Because many of the concepts in theology are also from philosophy. For example, just answering to the previous question, I said, what is the essence of something? What is the essence of something, or what is the substance of something? That which makes something different from another thing. No, that is the essence or substance. So, what is the substance, or so? For example, that question, the concept substance, the essence, etc., are also applied in theology. For example, when explaining the Trinitarian theology from a Christian point of view, the God is understood as God is one, but with three persons in one God. So from Christian background, we say that Father, Son, and Spirit. But how do I understand that this God is same in nature, but three in person? How can I understand that? In order to understand that concept, I have to understand that the very concept essence. What is the essence? What is person? What is the, so essentially the same, existentially the different. What is the existential difference? What is the essential unity? So these concepts are also philosophical concepts. And so we have to have, for the clarification of thought, we have to have a proper background of philosophical reasoning. And faith is not simply emotional. There can be people who say that faith is concerned with some emotional people, those who are not rational and so on. But faith is certainly rational. Faith is rational. So in order to clarify, in order to explain these concepts in theology, we have to have we have to apply many of the concepts of philosophical concepts, and that's why it is a must. And there is a book. Actually, there is a document from Rome itself that is which speaks of this relation between reason and faith, or religion and philosophy, etc. That is entitled as Faith and Reason. In Latin, it is Fides et Ratio. So that is why, and I can also add another point. From the Greek world itself, as I said, religion was the common matrix of philosophy and to a certain extent, I can say, science. So in order to understand this theology and the theological concepts, we have to have a clear conceptual, many of the philosophical concepts are derived from, many of the theological concepts are derived from, already taken from philosophy. So we have to have that understanding. Then more than that, the study of philosophy gives a clarity of thought. And that is what I personally see. Personally speaking, my own studies or higher studies in philosophy has contributed much for my theological discourse or theological writing. So that's why from the time of Thomistic or medieval Thomistic period, we have this understanding from the ecclesiastical authorities that priestly candidates or seminarians has to study first philosophy. There was a historical or a dictum that philosophy is the philosophia ancilla theologia. Philosophy is the servant of theology, but there, in what sense it is? Philosophy gives to a certain extent serving the theological discourse by providing conceptual clarification. When we understand theology as a rational discourse of the divine, so we need to have a clear understanding of each concept. Then only further explanations will be properly understood. So it has become a part of seminary formation also. Philosophy, the study of philosophy. And philosophy, okay. And as I said, from the Indian perspective also, great mystics are also great gurus, the theologians, even Hindu mystics, Hindu philosophers, and they are also great theologians also. So these two disciplines has to go together. And that's why I entered with my conclusion in my lecture. We cannot simply separate and compartmentalize. These are part of our existence and part of our experience. So in order to give a rational explanation to our experience, we have to have this combination of faith and reason, philosophy and religion.
Thank you, Father. Due to lack of time, we won't be able to discuss all the questions. Thank you so much, Father, for enlightening us today.
Very good.
Now, I welcome Anish K. Joseph, Assistant Professor, SB College, Chegnasheri, to propose the vote of thanks.
Very Reverend Dr. Thomas Padiyath and all the esteemed participants. The second session of the online course on philosophy and theory, today by Reverend Dr. Thomas Padiyath, has turned out to be a very comprehensive overview of classical Western philosophy from the ancient Greek period through the medieval scholastic period to the contemporary times. So justifying the title of our online course, Introduction to Philosophy and Theory, Reverend Dr. Padiyath's lecture has been really effective in introducing the fundamental concerns of Western philosophy and arousing the interest of the participants to the various debates within the field. I wholeheartedly on behalf of the department and the college, thank you, dear Father, for your genuine efforts and concern to the college and the department. Thanks a lot, Father. We recognize that the attendees of this course are of a very diverse nature, ranging from beginners to scholars in the field of philosophy. And we are sure that the entire course will definitely satisfy most of you. And I thank all participants of today's session for your active participation and interaction during the Q&A. I also acknowledge with love all the ones who labor for this academic endeavor, our head of the department, Professor P.J. Thomas, the conveners, Dr. Raju Sebastian and Dr. Robin E.J., C. Praxis, the entire faculty of the department, and our dear students, Nina, Irene, Abhishek, Dan, and Pius, and a lot more who facilitated today's session. So let's all meet for the next lecture on 26th September by Professor Sanil B. of IIT Delhi. Thank you all once again. Thank you, Father.
Thank you.